I'm going to say quickly before I start, Eric will talk about some other playwrights in this, but if you're going to read an Eric Samuelsen play as a Mormon, read The Plan. It's available online. It was published in Sunstone, and it's a series of scenes of Old Testament women and these dialogues with them and other characters that get at some really interesting issues. I love The Plan. All right, so pretend I'm smarter and more accomplished now as I speak as Eric. When I was just beginning my career as an LDS playwright and theater scholar in the late 1970s, the animating force that drove me and my friends and colleagues was what we regarded as prophecy, the oft-cited comment from Orson F. Whitney that we would someday have Shakespeares and Miltons of our own. I don't recall that we spent much time unpacking Whitney's comment. We just knew there would one day rise a Mormon playwright equal in cultural impact and literary renown to Shakespeare. Since none of us were much interested in writing lengthy, theologically dense narrative blank verse poetry, the Milton half of the equation became rather neglected. It wasn't just us. That period, the late 1970s, was a time when church leadership actively encouraged creative work. Boyd K. Packer's 1976 talk, The Arts and the Spirit of the Lord, cited Whitney specifically, though suggesting that our progress towards fulfilling Whitney's vision was proceeding more slowly than it needed to be. In 1977, the Ensign repurposed an older talk by President Spencer W. Kimball for the special edition dedicated to the arts. That talk, President Kimball's A Gospel Vision of the Arts, was the first talk I read after returning from my mission, and has remained a constant source of inspiration. 20 years later, Elder M. Russell Ballard's Filling the World with Goodness and Truth again combined admonishment and encouragement for those of us who fancied ourselves as possessing some literary or theatrical skill. We needed to reach higher. We needed to dig deeper. A Mormon Shakespeare's work would reflect the profundity of gospel teachings while providing a clear-eyed commentary on the world. Hopefully, while producing our art, we would also stay in the church. President Kimball hoped for not just a Mormon Shakespeare, but a Mormon Wagner, a composer of Wagnerian skill and accomplishment. But he also, as has been mentioned, rather nervously hoped that whoever answered that call would, in his personal life, not quite be, Wagner. I did it myself in my first published article after joining the BYU faculty in 1980 in BYU Studies, in which I suggested that a Mormon Shakespeare would require a Mormon globe, and urged someone to start a theater company, preferably in Utah, and preferably around Lehi, so we could draw audience from both Salt Lake and Utah counties. It is my purely subjective personal view that the quest for a Mormon Shakespeare has become passé among younger Mormon artists, and this strikes me as an altogether healthy development. Certainly we want to write well and hope for personal success, but the Academy has changed, and achieving literary greatness is properly no longer the desideratum for literary achievement. We now understand literary works as artifacts of culture, as the products of complex interaction between authors and subjects and audiences and milieus. We view literature today not as a hierarchy, but through a variety of cultural and critical lenses. When Whitney, in 1888, wrote, "We will build up a literature whose top shall touch heaven, though its foundation may now be low in earth," he's describing a way of looking at literature, up good, down bad, that no one subscribes to anymore. Our contemporary postmodern approach to literature, I must add, is altogether good and right and worthy and virtuous. A quick Google search of Mormon Shakespeare links to recent articles whose slant strikes me as unfortunately reactionary. A rather gushing Meridian review of a mediocre novel, or to articles both bemoaning and celebrating successes of Mormon writers of fantasy genre fiction. Whether Whitney intended his remarks as exhortatory or prophetic, and rereading Home Literature, his seminal article again, I think he meant it both ways. We don't think that way anymore. A Mormon Shakespeare would require the building of a Mormon time machine, calibrated back to 1590. Shakespeare wasn't trying to write great literature. He was a successful commercial playwright and actor, creating material for the company in which he was a shareholder. A hack, out to make a buck, as well as the most extraordinary dramatic craftsman. His plays remain viable in contemporary production. His theatrical world, no less than his historical period, no longer exists. Having said all that, let me add that there are LDS playwrights today who write plays, good ones, which are produced with varying degrees of commercial success. And what I find fascinating about their work are the specific ways in which their work does reflect Mormon theology writ large. That's the flip side of the various talks I cited earlier by general authorities on the arts. Each of them addresses this, the hope that LDS beliefs, values, culture, and history will inform the best art we can produce. In this paper, I will examine the dramatic works of 3 LDS playwrights, Tim Slover, Neil LaBute, and Melissa Leilani Larson. I chose them because I think they're outstanding writers and because I'm familiar with their work. I do think it is likely that outstanding LDS theatrical artists can be found anywhere the church is found, in Africa or South America or Asia. I wish I knew more about them. I wish I could read their plays, but these 3 will do for now. Eugene England, back in the 70s, provided a helpful 3-part definition of Mormon drama and literature. First, he said, there were works produced by people with no affiliation with Mormonism, which nonetheless reflect our history and culture. Those would include today plays like Tony Kushner's Angels in America and the Book of Mormon musical. Second, said England, would be works by LDS artists on secular subjects, though presumably influenced by the author's beliefs and values. All 3 of these writers are known for works that meet this description. Finally, we should expect works by LDS writers that do deal specifically and directly with Mormon historical topics, culture, or theology. Again, the 3 writers I describe have written works in this category as well. What interests me about these writers is the very different ways in which their best work reflects their Mormonism. I should add as well that I think they're terrific playwrights. Slover and Larson both self-identify as active, believing Latter-day Saints. LaBute did as well during the early years of his career while he was writing the plays I will primarily examine here. LaBute has since left the church. I want to start with Neil LaBute. He is known today almost more as a filmmaker than as a playwright. He launched his filmmaking career with In the Company of Men, a Sundance hit based off his own play. From 1997 to 2003, he made films out of his best early plays, including The Shape of Things, Your Friends and Neighbors, and Bash, Latter-day Plays. These plays will be the primary focus of my study. What's interesting about LaBute's plays is how they center on questions of morality. This does not mean that his plays involve characters wrestling with vexing ethical dilemmas, or trying to parse out precisely which moral imperatives should be applied to some tricky interpersonal quandary. Not at all. The plot of a LaBute play typically involves dreadful characters, thoroughly appalling monsters, fiends really, deliberately trying to hurt people for their own pleasure or profit, and getting away with it. In the Company of Men, for example, is about Chad and Howard, 2 young businessmen on assignment away from the home office where they usually work. Bored and restless, Chad persuades Howard to join him in the following plan. They will find a vulnerable female co-worker. They choose a hearing-impaired woman, Christine, and they will both begin to pursue her romantically. They will try to throw her off balance, confuse her, entice her sexually. They will declare their affection for her and do everything within their power to get her to fall for one, or preferably both of them. They will then dump her on the same day to see if they can shatter her emotionally. And it works. Howard is deeply troubled by what Chad has persuaded him to do and desperately tries and fails to make it up to Christine. Chad finishes his assignment and returns to his girlfriend, to all appearances renewed and refreshed. The Sundance movie based on this play launched the career of Aaron Eckhart, who was superbly sociopathic as Chad. It's an incredibly disturbing film, intentionally so. Some audiences were completely appalled by it, but of course we're meant to find Chad appalling. To an audience aware that dramatic representation does not imply approval or endorsement, the play offers an opportunity for moral self-examination. Have I ever behaved that abominably? Certainly not. But have I ever behaved even close to that badly? Have I ever treated anyone, and especially have I, as a man, ever treated any woman with anything like that level of misogyny? I found watching it, and I've seen it both in theatrical production and as a film, a profoundly troubling but ultimately beneficial exercise in self-criticism. In the same vein as The Shape of Things, a 2003 London off-West End hit, which he also turned into a film. Evelyn, an art student, meets Paul, an insecure fellow student, at an art gallery. She begins molding him, agreeing to and then refusing sex until he accedes to her requests. He begins working out, begins dressing more stylishly. He distances himself from friends she disapproves of. He is finally persuaded to undergo plastic surgery. Then he discovers that he has been her work of art, her thesis project. He is her artistic medium. As some artists work in clay or marble, she has been working on him, using sexuality as her primary brush or chisel. Again, Evelyn is a monster. Again, Paul is her hapless victim. And at the end, he is left impotent and furious, and she is awarded her degree. We might ask ourselves afterwards what thesis committee could possibly approve such an odious final project. Just as we might ask ourselves after viewing In the Company of Men what kind of trouble Chad could face if Christine were to offer a complaint with the company's HR staff. But those concerns are a bit beside the point. Labute does not provide us with that larger context because it's irrelevant to the moral concerns that animate him. What responsibility do artists have to their models or to the subjects of their work? If I fancy myself an artist, does that give me license to harm in the service of my art? Have I ever done anything like this? And if so, how quickly can I repent? I might also mention Labute's one LDS-oriented work, Bash. It was first produced in New York in 1999 and has subsequently enjoyed long runs there, on HBO, and in London. It consists of 3 short plays, each profoundly disturbing. In the first, Iphigenia in Aurum, an LDS businessman smothers his infant daughter in order to advance professionally. The play consists of his monologue confession and rationalization. In the second, A Gaggle of Saints, straight young LDS men beat a gay man to death as a lark. One of them gives the victim a priesthood blessing, while another steals the victim's ring and uses it to propose to his girlfriend. Finally, in Medea Redux, a woman describes her affair at 13 with a married man, and the son that affair produced, who she has likewise murdered. Again, it's essential that we point out that Labute is not suggesting that any of these events or characters are in any way typical of Mormons or of Mormon behavior. They are works of fiction, inventions of language. Euripides did not create Agamemnon or Medea as role models, but as cautionary tales. That is likewise Labute's intention. It may seem surprising to hear me declare that a playwright whose characters behave abominably, don't get caught, get away scot-free, and even profit from their despicable actions is one who reflects Mormon standards of morality. Or that a playwright whose work is as incendiary as Labute's somehow reflects a Mormon aesthetic. One difficulty might be that there aren't any characters in Labute's plays who represent positive ethical standards. There's never an authority figure who can declare, that's wrong, that shouldn't happen. Presumably, we know that for ourselves. I compare Labute's work to Alma chapter 47 and its detailed description of the contemptible and treasonous Amalickiah. But of course, the book of Alma is mediated by the editorial presence of Mormon, who frequently provides contextual commentary. We're never left to wonder if there's a sense in which Amalickiah might be seen as admirable. But no such mediator appears in any of Labute's plays. He trusts his audiences to mediate their own responses. He trusts us to trust him. Moving on from Neil Labute, the second playwright I wish to examine is Tim Slover. Slover taught at BYU and is currently on the faculty of the University of Utah. His plays are deeply informed by his interests in history. They are meticulously researched and written with grace, humor, and compassion. Only one of his plays deals specifically with Mormon history, Hancock County, about the trial of the murderers of the prophet Joseph Smith. I will return to that play momentarily. If Neil LaBute's plays center on questions of morality, Tim Slover's center on the need for an atonement. His best-known work, A Joyful Noise, about Handel and the creation of the oratorio The Messiah, played off-Broadway and has been a regional theater staple for years. As the play begins, in 1741, Handel is elderly, ill, and his career is failing. The Italianate operas, with their preposterous plots and flamboyant castrati stars, which had been the staples of his career, once popular, were now seen as ridiculous. Tastes had changed, and suddenly Handel was an old-fashioned laughingstock. When the librettist, Charles Jennens, sends him an odd collection of scriptural passages and suggested they might make an oratorio, Handel is initially perplexed. But when a performance opportunity presents itself, he writes The Messiah in just 3 weeks' time. Meanwhile, the actress and soprano Susanna Sibber had also seen her career prospects halted. A salacious adultery scandal had led to the publication by her husband, Theophilus, of a pornographic, mostly fictional account of her escapades. She had become persona non grata in the theater world and could see little recourse but suicide. Instead, Handel decides to take a chance on her and cast her as one of the 2 female soloists in the oratorio. And the climax of the play occurs when Slover makes explicit what was otherwise clear enough. Susanna, before the king and a persecuting bishop, sings, "He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief." Susanna, so desperately in need of redemption, has embraced Christ's atonement. What's so lovely about this play is its more expansive understanding of the atonement, which I have come to see as somewhat unique to Mormonism. Bruce C. Hoffman of the 70 expressed this understanding in a lovely 1990 General Conference talk, Beauty for Ashes. Said Hoffman, "The Savior's atonement is thus portrayed as the healing power not only for sin, but also for carelessness, inadequacy, and all mortal bitterness. The atonement is not just for sinners." Handel's professional disappointments, the ridicule he suffered, and his own ill health, these were also human conditions for which our Savior's sacrifice provides solace and redemption. We see this theme play out in play after play of Slover's. In Treasure, Slover depicts Alexander Hamilton in the lowest point of his life, when an affair led to his disgrace and nearly ended his marriage. Though Hamilton acknowledges fully his complicity in the affair, its publication was part and parcel with the political intrigues in which he was embroiled. In A March Tale, William Shakespeare tries to reconcile the heavy professional demands on his time with the long-distance difficulties of a marriage to a wife living a 2-day horse ride away. In Virtue, his most recent play, the visionary nun Hildegard von Bingen struggles to remain true to her divine muse, while wrestling with feelings of attraction for a particularly inspirational novice. I am particularly taken with Hancock County, Slover's one play about Mormon history. Although Brigham Young is a central character in the play, the plot centers on the hard-drinking prosecuting attorney, Josiah Lamborn, who diligently tries the men who murdered Joseph Smith while fighting through his own many demons. Lamborn is the quintessential Slover protagonist, damaged and denounced, a man who has nearly destroyed his own professional career and is struggling to do a difficult and unpopular job. In his jury summation, again, we see the theme of atonement. Murder just ain't murder if you happen to dislike the victim. Well, I want to tell you, you're doing the right thing. Oh, not because of Joseph Smith's morals or his militia. Hell, y'all got one of those. No, it's his ideas. I've been reading them, and they're so dangerous and pernicious that you folks had no choice but to kill him. Just listen to what he wrote. Hold out to the end, and we shall be resurrected and become like gods. As far as I can make out, this man believed human beings can turn into gods. How's that for blasphemy, members of the jury? But just try to grasp it for a moment if you can. All our meanness and our fear and our little hatreds and our weakness all turned into glory. Now imagine someone actually believing that. I should finally mention that Slover, for all his success, has struggled with the most extraordinary ill fortune professionally. He was busy marketing a screenplay version of A March Tale, a romance in which the main character is William Shakespeare, at the same time that Miramax was producing the film Shakespeare in Love. More recently, it happened again as he tried to market a lovely play about Alexander Hamilton, a few months before a rather well-known musical on the subject was working its way to Broadway. If there is to be a Mormon Shakespeare, we might add pure luck as a crucial factor in his or her emergence. The third playwright of this paper is Melissa Leilani Larsson. Of Filipino-Swedish heritage, she is younger than Slover, a Labute, by over 20 years. Her main successes so far in her career have been stage adaptations of Jane Austen novels. I include her here because of two extraordinary recent plays, Pilot Program and Little Happy Secrets. Melissa Leilani Larsson is a problem solver. For years, she worked as a theater stage manager. Stage managers, in case you're not familiar with theatrical nomenclature, are the staff sergeants of the theater world. Directors decide what approach any production will take, what a show's overarching concept will be, how the show will look, move, feel, what it will mean. Stage managers make it happen. Stage managers make sure the actors show up on time, memorized and ready to work. Directors work with designers, conceptualizing a set, lighting, sound. Stage managers make sure the set gets built, on time, under budget, and that it's safe to walk on. But it's more than that. Larsson has worked on shows with big casts and budgets, but she has also worked in smaller local theaters with tiny budgets and unpaid volunteer labor. She's great at working with limited resources, of making do, improvising, getting a show on its feet by sheer force of will. And she was legendary for her unflappable temperament, her resolute humor in difficult circumstances, her mild but formidable omnicompetence. A Mel Larsson show works. And what is a Jane Austen adaptation but an exercise in problem solving? Those marvelous novels with complex stories, excuse me, with many fascinating characters, especially minor characters, who are among Austen's richest creations, pose the most demanding trials for the adapting playwright. How do you condense so enchanting a story to a couple of hours entertainment? What do you cut? What do you keep? How do you tell a complicated tale simply enough so it can be understood, using Austen's rather dense language while still retaining the charm and wit and incisive social commentary of the originals? How do you balance the three Jane Austens, the satirist and comic, the unquenchable romantic, and also the fiercely committed feminist? Mel Larsson succeeds because she is also those three things, satirist, sympathetic romantic, and feminist. But now, in Pilot Program and Little Happy Secrets, she explores, with wit, insight, and compassion, the toughest issues of her own culture. And what gives these plays their unique texture and power is our dawning recognition that these are issues that may not have a solution. The problem solver is stumped, the stage manager confounded. We're left with sorrow and perhaps a quiet, impotent rage. Claire in Little Happy Secrets has fallen in love. Or maybe not. Maybe she's just enthralled in the grips of a deep romantic attraction. But she's LDS, a committed member of the LDS faith, and the person she's in love with is another woman. And how does she resolve that? She's a returned missionary, a committed and faithful Latter-day Saint, and she is in love with, or perhaps just attracted to, someone she cannot, should not, must not be with. And she knows it. And she knows, and we know, that there is no easy answer to her dilemma. There may not, in fact, be an answer at all. And the result is tragedy, not suicide, not murder, not anything melodramatic, just the profoundest unhappiness. Abigail in Pilot Program has agreed to complicate her marriage with polygyny, share her husband with another woman, as she believes is required of her by her church leaders. The play has a contemporary setting. It's best regarded as a thought experiment. It's a pilot program. She and her husband pray about it, and she is the one who receives revelation. And Abigail loves her husband deeply, and, scarred by her own battles with infertility, thinks another wife might provide him with the child she knows he wants. Both women, Claire from Little Happy Secrets and Abigail in Pilot Program, are in love. Both women find in and through their love torment and agony, and things are unlikely to change for them or improve. And we know both women very well indeed, in part because they talk to us. While Little Happy Secrets is largely about the relationship between Claire and Natalie, the central relationship of the play may be between Claire and the audience. That is also likely true of Abigail, who blogs to us. I call both plays tragedies, but both defy easy definitions. Mel writes with wit and affection about her own culture, and both plays have moments of humor. Above all, though, the plays lead to conversation. After seeing them, we audience members seem compelled to talk about them. The test of a great play isn't whether audiences laugh or cry. It's the degree to which the play gets under your skin. After seeing either play in a good production, you can't let it go. You talk in the car on the way home. You wake in the middle of the night thinking about it. Again, it's about problem solving. My wife and her sisters do this all the time. When we get together, they raise an issue they're facing. Perhaps a child faces a personal dilemma. How to help her resolve it. I'm in a dispute with a neighbor. What should I say and when? Informal conversations about the challenges of LDS life, about reconciling the occasional tensions of life, from a Christian Mormon perspective, take place, I think, all the time in LDS culture. Wasn't it Joseph Smith who wrote, "By proving contraries, truth is made manifest"? And so, in one of our finest contemporary playwrights, we have a woman whose best work proves, tries, tests the contraries of our culture. She's a pragmatist, a practical woman, deeply committed to her own understanding of what we call the Restoration, but acutely in tune with the difficult paradoxes of gender and sexuality and patriarchy embedded within Mormon culture. She poses problems that can't be solved and gently devastates us with the pain and heartache that results. The reality is that active Latter-day Saints of Larson's generation, even those who remain active in the church, are located uncomfortably at the crossroads upon which the church itself currently rests. They know about Nauvoo polygyny and believe that many young women in that period suffered terribly. They have gay friends and don't understand what seems like a double standard for how our LGBT brothers and sisters date, court, fall in love. They cannot contemplate patriarchy without considering it, at least to some degree, oppressive. Larson, as an active and believing young woman of color, is acutely attuned to those tensions and pressures and issues. She is the gentlest of tragedians, the least strident of feminists. But in her work, we feel the genuine pain suffered by so many who cannot figure out how to reconcile their witness of the Restoration with what strike them as retrograde cultural practices. Larson's work, at its best, gives expression to that pain. If she can or doesn't resolve the issues that underlie it, it may be because that's a task beyond the work of dramatists. All three of these fine writers are deeply influenced by the culture which produced them. All three try, in their own way, to speak truth as they understand it. All three use theatrical language to pose uncomfortable questions, to reconcile difficult doubts. Plays are meant to be experienced in production. Those of us fortunate enough to see these fine works are forever altered by the experience. That's what our 2 hours traffic on the stage is meant to accomplish. Shakespeare said that, and if we don't have a Mormon bard, we do have some very fine writers.